And as our next speaker, I would like to welcome Dr. Florian Reul from Linklaters, and he will be speaking to us about the introduction of MiCA. Welcome, Florian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Florian. I'm the head of FinTech Germany for Linklaters, one of the global law firms, and I'm a regulatory lawyer. And due to all those hats I'm wearing, I'm very excited to be here today and to give you a short introduction to MiCA. And I'm excited about MiCA, not only because as a lawyer you do not get the chance too often to be part and at the beginning of the foundation of a new regulation for a new thriving ecosystem. So I want to take the chance and, here we go. I want to take the chance and not dive into too many details, but I want to try to provide you with a broad overview. What is MiCA? What is in scope of MiCA? Once you are a crypto asset service provider, give you a sense of what your obligations are going to be, and probably most important, how do I become a crypto asset service provider? If you are an issuer in crypto assets, what are your obligations around that? And then I'm going to wrap up with a short outlook, what it means in the broader and more global scale. And like I said, I'm not going to dive into too many details, even though I know that there are many parts which are very interesting to discuss about. But I want to, like I said, give you a broader sense of MiCA. So I think before I start, the question I get asked most often, and I want to get that out of the way up front, is, do I like MiCA as a lawyer in that crypto space? And I think my answer has to be, yes, I do. I know that it is not perfect, but I think done is better than perfect. It's a first step. And there's still a lot of room for improvement. We're going to see the second and third level of regulations, the RTS coming. So I think there's still a lot of room to address specific questions and to improve this whole thing. And I think if you think about what Max Weber said, that law is former politics based on experience, it becomes quite obvious that the parts on MiCA that are based on existing rules and based more closely on financial instruments and stuff where there's a great experience available, those parts are, in my opinion, better and already more ready. While other parts, for example, NFTs, where there's not that much political experience around that there's still many parts that needs to fall into place over the next couple of years. But like I said, I'm pretty confident that it will become better, and I think for all of us it's important to remember after MiCA is before MiCA 2. Yeah? So we are still at the beginning of this journey. And I think this journey is still a lot better once we have MiCA in place as compared to the world we are living in Europe right now. Because right now, crypto regulation is basically scattered around those three pillars. You have AML, anti-money laundering regulation, which usually requires some form of registration with a national supervisor. You have, on the other hand, certain licensing regimes. But in no means this is harmonized. This is different between all jurisdictions in Europe. It's a patchwork. In Germany, for example, the German legislator has drawn financial instruments into the MiFID sphere and the classical financial market regulations. Others, such as France, for example, have developed a specific crypto regime. So it's super cumbersome if you want to expand throughout Europe, because you have to take a look at each of those jurisdictions and find your proper fit. And then there's a financial promotions regime which allows you or not allows you to promote your instruments. So we have done, as if I may use that as a very short commercial, we have taken the most important jurisdictions from a commercial perspective in Europe, and created a survey, what's the current play of crypto regulation in those, based on those 3 pillars, and we have tried to answer the most the questions we've get asked most often, and this will be public in the next couple of weeks. And I think this shows you it's a good slide to show you the need for a more harmonized approach. And this harmonized approach is MiCA, as part of the EU digital finance package, trying to establish a more harmonized regime throughout Europe. So what is in scope of MiCA? I think there are 5 key elements. First element is rules and regulations around the offer of crypto assets and the admission to trading. The second key element is crypto asset services. What are you allowed to do? What kind of licenses do you need? And what goes along with those licenses? Then super interesting and very novel market abuse regime. My US colleague, Josh Clayman, is going to be here throughout the day. And it's very interesting if you talk with her what the US regulator is doing with market abuse as compared to what we're going to have here with MiCA. Another important part, monitoring and caps in relation to crypto assets. I'll touch upon that later. And material acquisition. If you are already a regulated entity, you're well aware of that. That basically means if you are a regulated crypto asset service provider and you are going to be engaged in mergers and acquisition, you're going to be bought or you're going to sell a CASP, then the regulator is going to monitor and take a close look at your buyer. So what are some of the general issues with the question of what is in scope of MiCA? First of all, that's a very broad definition, deliberately broad, of crypto assets, even broader for electronic money tokens and for asset reference tokens. Those are the 3 types of crypto assets we find in MiCA, and I'll provide more details later on those. What's not in scope of MiCA are financial instruments and other regulated instruments. So as for now, it is still possible to issue DLT-based financial instruments without being caught by MiCA. One of the more hotly debated subjects among MiCA enthusiasts is how NFTs are dealt with. And the general idea, although it's very politically disputed, and I think if you have questions, Michael would be happy to, or would be the perfect guy to answer those. But generally, true NFTs are not intended to be captured by MiCA. But there are limitations to this. For example, if you have fractions of NFTs or larger collections of NFTs, those are going to be drawn and be subject to MiCA. Then you will have carve-outs of certain entities. For example, the ECB will not be subject to MiCA. And I think also here at the bottom, the application to decentralized arrangements, also super interesting. The idea, again, behind MiCA, if it's a truly decentralized program, a truly decentralized arrangement, this is not going to be captured by MiCA. But as we have seen in our praxis, I think globally, and the legislator seems to agree with that, we hardly see any truly decentralized arrangements. So MiCA will capture those pseudo-decentralized arrangements, and entities or natural persons who form part of that arrangement will be captured by MiCA. Yeah. Just to give you a broad feeling how is the framework of MiCA, what's the logic behind MiCA. If you're going to offer crypto assets, you will fall into the three buckets, crypto asset, asset reference token, and e-money tokens, and there are rules for significant tokens, which are determined by their importance and certain thresholds. If you are significant, you will have additional requirements, more prudential requirements, and you will have a European supervisory authority and not the national supervisory body. There are general rules that apply to all, and there are certain exemptions which lets you fall outside of MiCA. Crypto assets we touched upon. if you are going to provide crypto asset services relating to those assets, you will be captured by MiCA as a CASP, as a crypto asset service provider, if you are providing one of those or several of those services. Again, if you're familiar with financial regulation and MiFID, you will feel kind of at home here. There's nothing extraordinary there, but if you're not regulated yet, for example, because your national regime has not a license regime, you will become, or there will be the need to become authorized. To me, one of the more interesting parts here is transfer services. If you are going to be engaged in transferring crypto assets from A to B, kind of like a payment service provider, you will have to get a transfer services license under MiCA as well. So if you are going to offer those services and you become a CASP, what are your obligations going to be? Some of the key obligations are to be found on this slide. I think the most important one we already touched upon, authorization. That means you will have to become authorized by one of the national authorities in Germany, most likely BaFin. But it also means that you will have to have a legal entity within the European Union, and this cannot be an empty shell. So that means if you're, for example, based in Asia or in the United States, it's not sufficient to just have that entity here and click the box. There will be a substantial review, and the effective management of that company for Europe has to be within Europe. On the upside, if you are located in Europe and if you get that license, you are able to passport throughout all Europe. You do not have to get a different license in any other European or EEA country. So your market suddenly becomes very wide with just compared to as it is now, probably a limited effort to be made. Some of the other obligations, you have to treat your customers fairly. There are disclosure requirements. You have to warn your clients of risks. There probably will be litigation risks around that. There will be prudential requirements, minimal capital requirements, organizational requirements, fit and proper requirements for management. I think also this will be interesting depending on the number of license applications we're going to see. Will there be sufficient fit and proper managers around? Yeah? You have to be able to manage and prevent and monitor conflicts. You have to have systems and control in place to ensure compliance with MiCA. Many in the industry rely heavily on outsourcing. For example, tech service providers, there are comprehensive requirements around that. That's also super important. In my mind, if you're currently drafting any outsourcing arrangements to try to cater to those requirements as closely as you can. There are going to be safeguarding requirements for your assets and the mentioned market abuse regime. So overall, that is going to be very burdensome, but I think one part that's really important to remember, this whole stuff is not done, as a means to make your life more difficult. It's not la pour la. It is designed to make systems better. This is like a lot of experience that went in there. And it is to minimize risk and to ensure a stable and efficient running of large-scale operation. So I think MiCA presents a chance here for the relevant entities to distinct themselves throughout the global competition as something of quality and with a high standard of governance. Maybe pretty interesting, in Germany we already have a license regime for example, crypto custody assets, and I think here the supervisor focuses on 3 aspects, and I think those 3 aspects will be a key focus point in the first years of MiCA to come as well. And those 3 focus points are IT requirements. They're doing a really deep dive in whether your IT systems are sound and good. Fit and proper management, we already touched upon that. You have to show that your management knows the crypto stuff, and by that way their IT infrastructure, and AML to be able to show that your AML provisions are sufficient. I'm going to leave those CASP obligations pretty soon, but I thought it would be interesting just to take a little bit of a closer look for custody and trading services. So if you are a trading platform, obviously you have to have operating rules, and those rules will be again tested and validated by BaFin. So this will be challenging to get that right. There will be no own account dealing on your platform, and you will have a market abuse regime. Again, your systems and procedure, and this is the IT part again, have to be resilient. You have to have the capacity to deal with peak volumes. There are transparency and reporting requirements, and there are time requirements for settlement, which absolutely makes sense. Oh, I thought it's still 5 before. Okay. Yeah, then I'll skip the custody part. If you want to become a crypto asset service provider, there are obviously those authorization requirements. We touched upon those already. And one interesting piece is that if you are already regulated, if you're a bank, a credit institution, a CSD, you do not have to go through that whole licensing process because you are already licensed, and this is built upon MiFID. So most of those requirements will already be in place. So therefore, it's less onerous if you are already licensed to get those crypto asset service licenses. You will still be required to comply with the MiCA framework, and obviously you have to have your business plan and everything in place. But that probably will make life a little bit easier for the established institutions. It's also very interesting to note, this does not work the other way around. So if you're a CASP and you want to extend into a traditional financial market, you would still have to go through the license regime, but that will make de facto your life easier because you're already familiar with that. But that is a very important point to base your decision on where you want to locate in Europe, because you will have that ongoing relationship with a national regulator. Potentially if you're built out into other markets as well. So it might be worthwhile to not only, take that into account because that's going to affect your day-to-day operations greatly. Then there will be transitional measures if you're already registered and licensed in a jurisdictions. You are able to leverage, or you should be able to leverage that into MiCA. Obviously, I don't know how that is going to be in Germany. If somebody knows, I'm super interested to talk to you, but I don't have any further information on that. Also interesting, super crisp timeline for the authorization process, 75 days if I counted correctly. As of now, what the regulator does, there's a 6 months period for financial institutions based upon receiving a complete application. And BaFin usually says, well, I'm starting to review and your application still is not complete. So the 6 months are not started until way into the process. So right now it takes a year, 14 months for that license. And that seems, as a great improvement to speed things up. Leaving the CASP, moving to the issuer obligations for e-money tokens. Super interesting, you have to be a credit institution or e-money institution. No other one can issue e-money tokens. Asset reference tokens can be issued by any legal person once you go through that licensing process, or credit institutions. And again, for crypto assets, no further requirements. You have to provide a white paper if you want to offer that. And if the issuer does not do that, you as a trading platform have to provide that white paper. Here are the monitoring caps and restrictions. That means you yourself have to monitor a certain threshold, 1 million transactions a day or a euro value of 200 million. If you're above those thresholds, the regulator will ask you to come up with a plan to keep that down in order to ensure financial stability and monetary transition here. So I think before I get cut off, the outlook for me is a very interesting part. So what happens next? I think this is just the legal scrubbing and entry into force of MiCA, nothing special here. There are certain transitional regimes for certain parts that's worthwhile to look into more detail, but that was too complex to lay out here. But I think this slide is very important, and this would be something I would love if you would take that with you. MiCA is not a standalone project. It draws you into regulation. You will be a regulated entity. You will be subject to AML requirements, and as such, it is a lot easier for the regulator to come up with new requirement to extend on the regulatory framework. This will happen a lot quicker, and you just have to be aware that this is a different ballgame now. Also, there are great chances attached with that. For example, the digital identity reforms will provide huge opportunities for DLT and blockchain space to leverage that and to use that. DLT pilot regime is absolutely natural to look at that and try to build upon that. And I think for us as an industry, that's super interesting and important that we are trying to use that pilot regime to make that worthwhile for the European Union to come up with that regime. And one of the parts, for example, DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which not only has requirements for regulated entities to become more resilient, it also extends to technical service providers who are not resilient. So, and you might be drawn into that if you are only catering to the crypto industry, depending on certain thresholds. You just have to be aware that this is part of a broader ecosystem of regulation which you're going to be part of. But I think this regulation is part of a global direction of travel. This is the first of its kind. I think it's a great opportunity for Europe and for Germany and Frankfurt as well, because we are already quite advanced, and we know from our practice throughout the world that all the regulators are looking very closely at how MiCA is set up. Financial Stability Board is picking up many of those pieces, and I think this is really the chance to establish ourselves as a first mover and drive home that first mover advantage if we are able to, build upon that and pick this up. Thank you.